It wasn't love, it was control. And I freed myself. It took me a long time to understand that what I called marriage was actually an emotional prison. And look, it's not easy to admit that, especially when everyone around you thinks you're lucky to have a man like him. That's what I heard all the time. Oh, he's so calm, so hardworking. But no one saw what was going on inside the house. No one saw how he looked at me like I was a burden, how he interrupted me mid-sentence or made fun of my opinions. Over time, I shrank into myself, thinking the problem was me. There was one particular day I'll never forget. It wasn't the worst day, but it was the one that woke me up. I'd spent the entire afternoon preparing a special dinner. It was a trivial thing, but I just wanted us to have a quiet evening of conversation. When he arrived, he barely looked at me. He sat on the couch, turned on the TV, and didn't even ask how my day was. When I went to invite him to dinner, he grumbled that he wasn't hungry and that I should stop making up trends. That was a realization. I sat on the kitchen floor, alone, and cried silently, because I realized it had been a long time since I'd even existed as a person. It's hard to explain, but in that moment, on the cold kitchen floor, I felt a mixture of shame, anger, and a pain that felt like it would swallow me whole. It wasn't just the dinner, it was everything. It was the silence, the contempt, the way he made me seem overbearing or needy for wanting attention. I remembered myself before that wedding, how full of ideas, plans, and life I was, and I thought, where did I go wrong? The next day, I did something small, but it was the beginning of everything. I grabbed an old notebook and started writing down everything I felt. Everything. No filter. I wrote that I felt lost, that I was afraid of being alone, but that I was lonelier than ever. I wrote that I wanted to escape, but didn't know where. It was the first time in a long time that I was honest with myself. It hurt, but it also gave me strength, because a part of me, which I thought had died, was still there. After that, I started paying more attention. Every sly word, every look of contempt, every time he laughed at me in front of others, and I started to stop justifying everything. Before I'd say, oh, he's just tired. He's not bad. He just doesn't know how to show it. But no, he was just being who he always was. And I was the one who had gotten used to being ignored. When you stop making excuses for those who hurt you, reality hits you head on. And it hurts, but it also frees. I spent a few days in silence. I didn't say anything to anyone. I just observed and wrote. I started remembering old conversations, moments when he humiliated me in front of my family and I laughed, embarrassed, pretending it was a joke. I began to realize that the fear of being alone had trapped me in a cycle where I'd accept anything just to have the slightest presence, the slightest companionship. And that was perhaps the hardest part, admitting that I'd suppressed myself, that I'd allowed so many bad things to happen out of fear. And then came the day when everything changed. He came home and complained about the way I'd arranged his room. He said it looked like a child had done it. I took a deep breath, and for the first time, I didn't cry. I just looked at him and said, if you don't like it, you can do it yourself. He was shocked. He looked at me as if I were someone else. And then I knew I'd crossed a line. Not his, mine. A line I'd drawn myself, where I'd finally said, enough. That night, I slept on the couch. But for the first time in a long time, I slept peacefully, because deep down, I knew. I had begun to return. It would still hurt. It would still be difficult. But I was no longer that woman who begged for crumbs of affection and accepted scorn as if it were normal. From that moment on, I would get up, even if I was afraid, even if I was trembling. But I would. The next day, I got up early and started organizing some of my things. It wasn't an impulsive decision. I knew I wouldn't be able to leave right away, but I needed to prepare. I gathered my documents, wrote down important numbers, and hid some cash in a small purse he never touched. I trembled as I did this. It felt like I was doing something wrong, but I wasn't. I was just trying to protect myself, and that feeling of guilt, of betraying him by wanting to take care of me, was one of the hardest things to face. I told a friend from work, the first person I confided in after years of silence. She listened to me without judgment and simply said, "You're not crazy." I always sensed something was wrong, but I thought you didn't want to talk about it. That broke me, because I always thought I was hiding it well, that no one noticed how he treated me. And knowing that someone saw it and said nothing out of respect for my pain made me cry again, but this time with relief. I wasn't as alone as I thought. I started secretly seeing a psychologist. I found one who charged a reasonable fee and worked at a time when I could pretend I was working overtime. Each session was a struggle. Sometimes I spoke little, other times I completely broke down. But there, I began to reconnect with myself. I remembered that I had value, that I could want more, that I wasn't ungrateful for wanting to leave a relationship that was hurting me. I'd spent so much time hearing that no one could handle me, that I started to believe it. The real turning point came about 2 weeks later. He came home complaining again, as always, but this time he said something that chilled me. "You should be thankful I'm still here, because no one wants a woman like you." He said it coldly, looking me straight in the eye, as if he were doing me a favor by being in my life. And I didn't cry. I didn't fight. I didn't yell. I just replied, "You're right. No one deserves to live with someone like me, weak, dull, and afraid. But I'm not that person anymore." That weekend, I went to my friend's house and didn't come back. I grabbed some clothes, took my notebook with all the notes that had helped me survive, and left. He texted, called, tried to manipulate me by saying I was abandoning everything for a whim, but I no longer felt guilty. I still felt fear, I won't lie, but it was a different fear. It wasn't his fear anymore. It was fear of the new, of what I didn't yet know, but I went anyway. The first night away was strange. I slept on a mattress on the floor, with a thin blanket and my heart racing, but I felt light. For the first time in years, I woke up without that weight on my chest, and I didn't even know what that felt like anymore. Over time, I started organizing my life. I found a small place to rent and started establishing my routine. I still heard some people say I'd been radical, that I should try to talk things through with him, but I no longer absorbed those things. Anyone who hasn't experienced what I've experienced can't understand. I had relapses, of course. There were days when I cried listening to songs that reminded me of the beginning of our relationship, when he still pretended to care. There were days when I almost texted him just to hear his voice. But during those times, I read everything I'd written in that notebook. I read it and remembered every pain I'd swallowed, every time I felt like nothing. And that kept me going. It wasn't resentment. It was self-care. It was remembering why I left. Today, a lot is still coming together. I won't pretend everything is perfect, because it's not. I still have fears, insecurities, and I'm still rebuilding myself. But you know what I have now? Silence, peace, freedom, and most of all, dignity. I look in the mirror and recognize who's there. I may no longer have that sham marriage everyone admired, but I have myself back. And that's worth more than any appearance. One of the most important things I learned was that self-love doesn't just happen. It's built gradually, sometimes amidst pain. I didn't wake up one day loving myself and saying, "I'm leaving now." It was a process, made up of small decisions: how to stop keeping quiet, how to stop accepting crumbs, how to look at myself in the mirror without looking away. There were days when it seemed impossible, but today, I see how valuable each step was. My family was initially divided. My mother thought I should give it another chance. My father remained silent. Only after a while did they understand. And even if they didn't, I had already decided. I would no longer live my life trying to prove to anyone that my pain was valid. Those who wanted to see it could see it, and those who didn't could go their own way. I was no longer going to explain myself to be accepted. It's funny how after you get out of a situation like that, you start to see the signs clearly. I look back and realize how many times he erased me in public, how many times my achievements were belittled, how many times I was ridiculed in the name of good humor. And I laughed so as not to start a fight. I laughed so as not to look like the exaggerated one. And now I understand. No one who loves you makes you feel inferior. Today, I can see other women going through what I experienced. Sometimes, just by looking at them, you can recognize the pain, the urge to scream, but not knowing where to begin. And that's why I decided to write this story. Because if just one person reads this and can relate, it was worth it. Because no one deserves to live in fear of being who they are. No one deserves to shrink every day to fit someone else's expectations. I'm still learning to live again. Sometimes I catch myself apologizing for trivial things, as if I'm expecting a scolding. But then I take a deep breath and remember that I no longer need to walk on eggshells. That today, my home is a safe place. That I can listen to whatever music I want, eat what I like, speak without fear of being corrected with contempt. And this, which seems small to someone who has never experienced the opposite, is huge to me. Some people said I should be thankful he never hit me, as if the only form of violence was physical. But the truth is, living with being diminished, ignored, controlled, it destroys a person from the inside, little by little. And it doesn't leave a mark on the body, but it leaves a scar on the soul. Only those who have had to rebuild themselves from the inside out know how much it hurts, but they also know how much it strengthens. I'm not a perfect woman, and I never will be. But today, I am whole. And that, for me, is already more than I dreamed of when I still lived in that silence. I thought I'd never be able to trust, love, or truly smile again. But today, even with the wounds still healing, I smile. Because I'm here. Because I chose to live, not just survive. If you've read this far and are going through something similar, don't blame yourself. Don't be ashamed. And most importantly, don't give up on yourself. It might take time. It might hurt a lot. But there is life after fear. There is peace after control. And there is true love. It starts within us.